public is being conditioned to look skyward. Institutional investment floods into missile defense, validated by contracts like the Missile Defense Agency's SHIELD award. Legacy media amplifies the narrative, fixating on kinetic threats with a known trajectory. This is not a strategic error. It is a calculated misdirection. The liability they are truly pricing is not a launch-on-warning scenario. The primary vector of modern conflict is not kinetic. It is silence. The entire architecture of Western economic and military power runs through a handful of choke points on the ocean floor. CSIS reports confirm that 95% of global data and trillions in daily financial transactions travel through these undersea cables. This is the circulatory system of the global economy. An attack here is not a localized event. It is a systemic solvency crisis. Severing these nodes does not produce an explosion. It produces a vacuum. It triggers the protocol for the blind Leviathan, a superpower stripped of its senses. A carrier group without satellite data is a billion-dollar ghost ship. A financial market without data feeds is a tomb of illiquid assets. The state becomes a paralyzed giant, possessing immense kinetic power it can neither see nor command. This is the mathematical endgame for a nation caught in a solvency trap. When the G20's economic governance fails, and a state is presented with a zero-sum choice like the Venezuela blueprint, submit to demands or face conventional annihilation, its only rational deterrent is asymmetric. It cannot win a kinetic exchange. It can, however, inflict a symmetrical economic wound by blinding the aggressor. The cost of a UUV is a rounding error compared to the cost of a single day of offline markets. The focus on missile defense is a hedge against the 20th century playbook, but the accelerant is economic decay, and the vector is silence. The real war will not be televised because its primary objective is to sever the very infrastructure that makes broadcasting possible. The launch-on-warning threat is not a missile, it's the deletion of the ledger. A nation-state does not go to war over ideology. It goes to war to solve a solvency crisis. When a state's domestic liabilities, its debts, its political promises, its social contract massively outweigh its assets, it faces a liquidity trap. It must generate new assets or default on its obligations to its own elite and population. The war in Ukraine, now past day 1D400, was never about territory. It was a kinetic line of credit. CSIS analysis frames the prolonged conflict not as a strategic blunder, but as a catastrophic drain on Russia's domestic political balance sheet. An unpopular war becomes a non-performing asset, a massive liability. With global economic levers like the G20, systemically broken and incapable of providing cooperative relief from debt and inequality, there is no bailout mechanism. The state is cornered. This is the solvency trap. When conventional kinetic force fails to generate a return on investment and cooperative economics are offline, the state's calculus becomes brutally simple. It cannot afford to lose conventionally, as this guarantees internal collapse. Its only rational path is to pivot. It must abandon the pretense of a limited, conventional war and activate asymmetric escalation protocols. Perceived weakness forces this pivot. The objective is no longer to win on the battlefield, but to threaten the core economic and logistical systems of the adversary's sponsors. This forces them to the negotiating table to prevent a systemic cascade failure. This isn't a strategy of strength. It is the final, calculated act of a debtor facing liquidation, changing the terms of engagement to avoid annihilation. It's a launch-on-warning protocol for economic collapse. The new battlefield is an accounting problem. According to analysts at RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute, the core equation is this: A $5 million main battle tank can be functionally neutralized by a $500 FPV drone. This is not a glitch in the system. It is the new system. The kinetic cost of destroying high-value assets has collapsed by a factor of 10,000. For every dollar of conventional force projection, the counterparty needs only a fraction of a cent for effective asset liquidation. This creates a fatal imbalance on the strategic balance sheet. This phenomenon is clinically referred to as the democratization of violence. The state's historical monopoly on industrial-scale lethality is over. As seen in the operational theaters of the Russia-Ukraine war, commercial-grade technology has been weaponized into a systemic threat. When a weaker state is pushed into a solvency trap, as per the Venezuela blueprint, its only rational response is to leverage this economic inversion. Asymmetric escalation is not a choice. It is the only remaining path to deter conventional annihilation. It is a mathematical certainty. Therefore, the massive institutional investment in missile defense, evidenced by contracts like the MDA Shield Award, is not a strategic offensive. It is a balance sheet entry. It is the cost of insuring against the blowback from failed economic governance. The G20's inability to manage global debt creates the conditions for conflict. Economic levers fail, kinetic threats are substituted, and the target nation is forced to adopt this low-cost, high-lethality protocol. Defending against a swarm of cheap drones is exponentially more expensive than launching one. This is the economics of lethality, leading directly from a solvency crisis to kinetic activation. The global map of conflict is a misdirection. The primary theaters of operation are not the front lines you see on the news. They are the gray zones, the proxy laboratories where systemic stress is engineered and measured. With the G20 confirmed as a failed entity, its inability to manage global debt and inequality is not a policy blunder. It is the starting pistol. The resulting power vacuum forces the testing of new control vectors in seemingly stable regions. Reports citing instability in nations from South Africa to Canada are not identifying root causes. They are documenting the controlled demolition of the old order in designated staging areas. These laboratories exist for one purpose: to calibrate the Venezuela blueprint for widespread deployment. When economic leverage fails, kinetic threats become the default language of power. As documented by analysts like Pepe Escobar, the ultimatum delivered to Caracas, expel foreign assets or face direct kinetic activation, is the new protocol. The gray zones are where this protocol is refined. The objective is to calculate the precise amount of economic pressure required to fracture a nation's solvency, forcing it into a binary choice: total capitulation or a kinetic response. It is a mathematical equation, not a political debate. This creates a solvency trap. For a nation pushed to the brink, with its currency destroyed and its economy isolated, the kinetic cost of conventional defense is infinite. The only rational strategic deterrent becomes asymmetric escalation. This is not a choice. It is a mathematical certainty dictated by an empty balance sheet. Launch-on-warning protocols are no longer exclusive to nuclear powers. They are the last resort financial instruments for insolvent states. The prolonged conflict in Ukraine, now past day 1400, according to media logs, serves as a stark reminder of the cost of miscalculating this threshold. The massive institutional investment in missile defense is the final receipt. The recent SHIELD contract awarded to firms like Tetra Tech is not a speculative defense measure. It is a direct accounting entry on the global balance sheet, a liability booked against the calculated risk of asymmetric escalation. They are prepaying the insurance premium for the blowback they know is coming from these proxy laboratories. This is the vector. G20 economic failure forces the use of kinetic threats, creating solvency traps that make asymmetric attacks the only logical response. The missile shield is the calculated cost of doing business in this new reality. The central protocol governing nuclear solvency is launch on warning. This is not a choice. It is a pre-calculated response. The doctrine, as detailed in RUSI analyses, states that a nation cannot absorb a first strike and retain the capacity for retaliation. Therefore, the launch order is not given upon impact, but upon credible electronic warning of an inbound kinetic attack. The window for this decision is measured in minutes. Waiting for confirmation is a mathematical guarantee of annihilation. This brings us to the fog of digital war. A systemic cyber attack can blind early warning radar and satellite networks, creating strategic paralysis. The commander is then presented with a zero-sum choice under extreme duress. Is the data blackout a technical failure, or is it the opening salvo of a decapitation strike designed to neutralize command and control? According to doctrine analyzed by CSIS, the protocol defaults to the most dangerous assumption. The institutional logic is cold. The risk of accidental global war is deemed a lower liability than the certainty of national extinction. The system is designed to launch out of fear. This entire kinetic liability is a direct consequence of economic decay. The systemic failure of cooperative bodies like the G20 to manage debt and global stability has rendered economic leverage inert. Source number 1. Powerful states are now forced to substitute kinetic threats for financial pressure, as established in the Venezuela blueprint. Source number 3. This forces weaker nations into a solvency trap, where their only rational deterrent is asymmetric escalation, including the development of cyber protocols to trigger this exact fog of digital war. The massive institutional investment in programs like the Missile Defense Agency's SHIELD contract is the balance sheet entry against this calculated risk. Source number 4. It is not a strategy for peace. It is a financial instrument to price the kinetic cost of a launch protocol activated by economic desperation. The G20's systemic failure to govern global debt and inequality is not a policy error. It is the terminal diagnosis of cooperative economics. Source number 1. This breakdown renders financial leverage inert. For dominant states, this forces a substitution. Economic pressure is replaced by the mathematical certainty of kinetic threats, a protocol now field-tested and standardized as the Venezuela blueprint. Source number 3. This places weaker states in a solvency trap. Faced with conventional annihilation, their only rational deterrent is no longer negotiation, but asymmetric escalation. The massive institutional capital flowing into contracts like the Missile Defense Agency's SHIELD program is not a strategic preference. Source number 4. It is a balance sheet entry, a prepaid liability against the calculated certainty of this exact escalation from a cornered actor. The kinetic cost is now priced in. The first move will not be a launch. It will be a calibration shot to test response protocols and measure economic pain tolerance. It must be attribution impossible. Within the next 12 months, anticipate a multi-day systemic shutdown of a top 10 global container ports' digital logistics and crane operating systems, masked as a catastrophic ransomware event or cascading hardware failure.